So welcome to the Global Entrepreneurship Week 2020. And I'm happy to be here to present and to really have this conversation on intersectionality and solopreneurship. There's a lot of lived experience for me in this space. And when I met Elaine a few months ago, and then we had this conversation, Elaine invited me to this, and today at Global Entrepreneurship Network UK, it's a Diversity and Inclusion Day as part of the Global Entrepreneurship Week celebration. So I'm really happy to be here. My name is Meenakshi Iyer, and I'm the founder and principal of Northstar Solutions and Services, which is a boutique future of work-oriented consultancy that partners with mid-career, culturally diverse technology professionals and small and medium enterprises, partnering with them in designing their transformation journeys, be it their professional transformation journey or digital and or business transformations for small and medium enterprises. So just a little bit of background, just about 3-4 weeks ago, so October 25th through 28th, to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the United Nations Day, a business colleague of mine, Hema Kangesan, who's a solopreneur based in Melbourne, Australia, and we co-hosted and co-presented a 3-day-long global conference on unpacking intersectionality. I had been in conversation with Elaine throughout this process, and so some of it I have, with Hema's permission, of course, some of the context setting for this presentation and conversation comes from that event as well. So we actually ended up with a team of more than 24 grassroots change makers from around the world. So we covered covered 5 continents. We had people representing 5 continents and 10 countries who shared their on-the-ground experience with intersectional identities and what it means to them and what are some of the challenges and opportunities when it comes to unpacking intersectionality. So with that, I'd like to kick us off for today. And just a little bit of context. So my personal story, this is like a pretty much summary of it. I'm born and raised in India, lived in different parts of India, and moved to the US about, it's 12 years now. And so between India and the US, I've lived in more than 10 different cities, and my career is split right in the middle of more than 2 decades, split right in the middle between India and the US. And I speak 4 languages, including English. My career is interdisciplinary, and I have a lot of experience leading and working with global and virtual teams. And right now with Northstar, my role is that of a personal agility and a collaborative leadership skills coach. So that's my story. And I think that I've always been aware of my own intersectional identity in terms of gender, class, caste, which is a big deal in India, and it doesn't really get talked about much in any other part of the world, at least to my knowledge. English as one of the languages that I'm fluent in, and what that meant for me in my own career, and what I do see with other culturally diverse technology professionals that I work with, who may speak English as a second or a third language. So I've always been aware of where I fell in terms of privilege and disadvantage. But I think moving to the US brought up some of those things from a different perspective. So today, what I really wanted to do in this conversation is talk about intersectionality and present a global perspective, and then talk about impact on solopreneurs and solopreneurship. And what can we as solopreneurs do to adopt an intersectional lens when it comes to our own business strategy? And I'd like to open this conversation with this quote from Audre Lorde, who's an American poet. And I really love this idea that there is no such thing as a single issue struggle, because we do not live single issue lives. And so I want to, I invite you to use the chat window to to describe in one word, what comes up for you when you see this quote? What does this quote bring up for you? There's no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives. Universality, yep, absolutely. And while you add your thoughts in the chat window, I'm going to stop sharing for a quick second. I do have a poll that I want to run, and I'm using a tool to run the poll so as to maintain anonymity. So I'll bring that up in a minute. So I see universality overlapping. Yes, absolutely. So what is intersectionality? Well, from a history perspective, this term was coined more than 30 years ago, in 1989, by Professor Kimberlé Crenshaw, who's an American lawyer and civil rights advocate. And she really talked about it in the context of, in the legal context, and then particularly what happens when race and gender intersect and overlap in the context of incarceration and the judicial the process. And really it has taken root in the last year or so, given everything that's happened in the US and how with the killing of George Floyd, how these conversations have spread around the world. And there is a renewed focus and attention on the history with colonialism, with imperialism, and how those have played out in terms of the lived experience of people from non-white and non-Eurocentered backgrounds. So that's from a historical perspective. So it's really, term in itself is not that old, but what we have experienced in terms of our lived experience, it goes back centuries. So this is a dictionary definition of it. And what you can see here is a couple of the words that popped up in the chat window. You see that being reflected here, right? So each of us has different layers of identities, different aspects to our identity: race, class, gender. In my case, like I said, caste, marital status, whether you have children or not, which part of the city you live in, all of that, right? So when it comes to your lived experience, your different layers of your identity, how they intersect and overlap, puts you in a position anywhere on the spectrum of privilege to disadvantage. Now, the other thing I'd like to point out here is that what might come across as a position of privilege in one part of the world may come up as put you in a completely opposite position in another part of the world. And what a particular intersection may show up more strongly in one part of the world than another. So for example, in India, as long as I lived in India, for me, gender and caste, the intersection of gender and caste was what defined my lived experience. And then along with that, the languages I spoke or I and the region of the country I came from. With my move to the US, it really quickly shifted to my immigration status in this country and my ethnicity. And gender kind of came after that. So that's been my lived experience, and that's how intersectionality really plays out in different parts of the world, and of course, you know, whether my lived experience is a consequence of me having a full-time job as well. My experience as an immigrant, South Asian immigrant female in this country would have been drastically different if I had not been part of the workforce here in the US. So a lot of those elements play out. So my question to you is, and I'm going to put a link in the chat window in just a minute. My question to you is, there's a selection of identities that I'm listing in the question. So if you click on this link, you will see the question that says, which one of these of your intersectional identities comes up most frequently in your interactions? All right. While you continue to respond to that, I do have another question with the same link. So my next question is, which of these identities do you try to hide as a solopreneur or as an entrepreneur? So next, I want to look at, and please keep if you have any questions or comments outside of the questions that I've asked, please feel free to use the chat window. So this is one visual representation of intersectionality. If you look online, this is something that you see, and you can see how it really, it's a spectrum around oppression and privilege. And there are all of these different layers depending on how they intersect and overlap, you can find yourself anywhere on this spectrum. So something interesting for me, and this was caste as a intersection doesn't appear here, and that tells me that this comes from a Western perspective. So if you were to look at it from a global perspective, it looks kind of like this, and there's more to it. Not all the intersections are covered here. So it also goes back to your native cultures, and whether it's a collectivist culture or an individualistic culture. What is the sense of self in these cultures? Does the individual see himself or herself in relation to someone else, or as an individual themselves? And in addition to that, what is their first language? How many languages do you speak? What is your gender and sexual orientation? What are the social norms around that? A lot of these can create your lived experience, and it varies from geography to geography, as I alluded to earlier. I'm going to pause here for a quick second and use the chat window to talk about, if you can describe in a few words, in like a sentence, what's coming up for you in terms of intersectionality in your own geography. We have a few regions of the world represented here. What have you observed as either a privilege or a position of disadvantage? If you can put that in the chat window. So for me, I see that my education and ability to speak English as the language, ability to speak English fluently, has put me in a position of privilege in where I live right now. Yeah, so I see race coming up. Yeah. Income. Yep. Yep. So keep that coming in the chat window. The mention around income really actually is a good segue into what I wanted to cover next in terms of how does all of this and the understanding around intersectionality, what does that have to do with solopreneurship or entrepreneurship? So the impact on solopreneurship, in general, what I have seen, and also the research that I did, it really shows up. I was able to summarize it in 3 buckets: opportunity, access, and the impact that you're able to create. Whether or not you're able to assume the role of a solopreneur or actually start something on your own, having that opportunity in itself comes from a place of privilege. So for me, My spouse has a stable job. We have a fairly decent income, and we are in a financially secure position that has allowed me, put me in this position of privilege to actually walk away from a full-time employment, and more than 2 decades of that, to walk away from that and take this time to try and do something on my own. Just to even have that opportunity, I come from a place of privilege. Next, in terms of access. Now, even if you have the opportunity, that's where I find myself, do I have the access to the right kind of people that can open doors for me and help me get set up, established in my business? Access, one thing I do want to clarify here, not clarify, really call out here, is that a lot of times access is mistaken for availability. Just because something is available doesn't mean I have access to it or anybody has access to it. So access is really having that pathway to what is available. Now, if you look at some, I wanted to read out some stats. So this is, of course, in the US context. So as of August 2020, as of August of this year, a total of founders or entrepreneurs were able to raise $87.3 billion with a B dollars. And guess how much went to Black and Latinx founders? A mere 2.6%. So that's roughly around $2.6 billion out of the almost $88 billion. So that tells you the challenges when it comes to access. The other thing is there's a lot of structural elements to this as well. Most businesses, I mean, if you're looking at starting off either something on your own as a solopreneur or as an entrepreneur, your seed capital usually is your friends and family. Now, because of how structural racism has played out, your average, your generational wealth in white families versus non-white families, there's a gaping difference there. So some estimates say that for white families in the US, it's around, your average income levels are around $170,000 and upwards. Whereas average income, annual incomes and wealth in general for Black families is a mere $17,000. So you lose out on, the access to the friends and family fundraising is almost non-existent. And then on top of that, access to banking, your structured processes for access to capital, they are either non-existent or very, very hard to access for people of color and indigenous communities. So this automatically leads to a reduced opportunity to create impact in your communities. So this is how I see the impact of intersectionality, depending on whether you are in a position of privilege or disadvantage, this is how it plays out. Please feel free to come off mute. And if you can share what's one thing that you have seen in your own geography about opportunity, access, and impact for entrepreneurs and solopreneurs.
So, actually, I was waiting for others to talk because I'm not a solo entrepreneur at the moment, but I have done things prior. Based on that, you have nailed it down. It makes a huge difference because, yes, getting the access in my nearest group was definitely very hard. And that had a direct impact on, the opportunities I could avail of, even getting some, like, just for an example, I was trying to get some contracts out of, the friends working in some companies because I had my own company, for example. And it was very, very hard because, no one was at that level who could bring in the projects to me, for example. I mean, of course, there are similar situations. So yes, I mean, I completely agree. And when you just said it, without taking any pause, I was like, wow, honestly, I never sat back and connected, but I mean, yes, it is definitely, everything is so much linked together. So yeah, thank you for, bringing light to that.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for sharing your experience. Access also, in addition to capital, it's also around networking, who you know, and what social groups you're a part of. Leal here talks about social groups. Absolutely. And I'll add from personal experience, I went to a local state university, a very well-known university in my area, to do my executive MBA. And the networking ROI that I got out of it was zero. And I found that it was very difficult for me to break into circles that were already set up as cliques, that had no one that looked like me, or thought or spoke like me. So it was very hard for me to break into those circles from even a networking perspective. And so for me, adopting a global approach and looking at markets and groups outside of the US, I've had way more success than I've had within the US, with groups within the US. So it's kind of ironic that although US is considered to be a melting pot, it's really not, in my personal lived experience. And so, if I were single, or if I were the sole breadwinner in my family, I would definitely still be at my full-time job. I would not have been able to do this, not even as a side hustle. So that sense of privilege is something that I'm very aware of.
I mean, actually, there's a Shiv here from Dubai.
Yes, Shiv.
I want to just add a few thoughts here, since you asked about different aspects that go towards, making a solopreneur successful. As we all know, entrepreneurship is a lonely game, and when you initially become an entrepreneur, maybe let's say a solopreneur, when you're the only person in the company, becomes all the more difficult. Even with all the financial assistance that you have, it might be quite challenging for you to negotiate this path if you do not have family support. So I would say family support is something which is very important. Plus also, I have seen from my personal experience that even if you have family support, sometimes they don't understand what you're doing, And so I have found a lot of solace and support in something like a mastermind, okay, where you probably go and discuss with peer groups, or maybe people with similar mindset who understand what entrepreneurship is all about, or what solopreneurship is all about. And that, I think, has gone a long way to strengthen my beliefs and my philosophy behind the entire game of entrepreneurship. So if I were probably not part of these kind of masterminds and support groups, probably I would have given up way early.
Absolutely, Shiv. Thank you for sharing that. And I know that as part of the Global Entrepreneurship Week, especially at Gen UK, there are sessions around founder well-being, and that focuses on mental health, particularly from a founder's, solopreneurs, or an entrepreneur's perspective as well. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I think you brought up a great point there, that, people think that therapy is only for people who are mentally, sick, or let's say mentally retarded, or mentally, disabled. But I think entrepreneurship is sometimes such a challenging game that a lot of entrepreneurs actually need therapy. And I was reading some great articles on this, about how entrepreneurs can actually benefit from therapy.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for sharing, Shiv.
Yes.
Yep. Elaine, I see a question from you. Oh, that's on Friday. Thank you. Founder well-being. Perfect. Elaine, I'm sorry, I lost the timing of your question.
Yeah, it was about, you were saying that when you were in the US, you found it less able to network than when you in different countries and national. And I found that amazing, really, why you thought that that was the case. You found it more difficult to build that network when you were in the US.
Yeah, I don't know. I have not really drilled down to any reason per se, other than, you know, I've been critical about myself, and I found that I was not doing myself any good. So I quickly pivoted to, okay, I'm going to work with wherever there is my ideas, I'm able to, what's the word I'm looking for? Able to collaborate, and wherever there is receptivity. So I pivoted, but I really struggled, particularly when I was doing my exec MBA, given that, you know, I came with work experience that was very diverse, and I'd done a lot of different things that people in my cohort hadn't. I think I think as I'm thinking about it, there's one thing that comes up for me, Elaine, is that, and this I see in the healthcare space, which is one of the industries I spent a lot of time in, is the Western world and resource-rich countries typically tend to believe that they know best and they have all the solutions. So there's a lot of reluctance to even consider propositions from other parts of the world. That's been my experience. So I find that there is very little, very limited curiosity in what's happening in other parts of the world. That was definitely when I was in business school, and that was like 5-6 years ago. That was my experience. I've not been able to come up with anything more beyond that. And of course, I think that which university do you go to, the pedigree that you get from all of these associations, you either have it or you don't. I found that it was very hard to break in.
Okay, thank you. That's interesting. I was very interested in what Shiv had to say about obviously founder well-being, speaking on behalf of Gen UK and what we're doing this week. We see that as being a really important area. The whole area, as you say, it's very lonely, being a solopreneur, and you know, where can you get that kind of support from? And we've got some interesting panel sessions, and be happy to provide links to that. But there's a very good one on Friday afternoon on mental health and not just solopreneurship, but founder well-being generally.
Yeah, yeah, thanks. Absolutely. And I'll share those links as well. And Elaine, please feel free to share the links in the chat if you want.
Hi, Meenakshi,
hey,
how are you?
Doing well, thank you. Good to see you here.
It's good to be here. Thanks for doing this. I've forgotten, where are you in the United States?
I'm in Virginia, Tom, Ashburn.
Is that where you've always been?
Yeah, I mean, when I did the Foundry as well, I was there. Yeah.
Okay, I would agree with your assessment in the United States, and it also, like here in the UK, it also tends to be regional. It's hard to break into new regions. So people who are not from California have to work hard if they're going to go out and try to raise money in San Francisco or something like that. And I've really enjoyed this session because it's you know, as a white guy, it's very, very difficult to find, well, a white American guy, it's very difficult to find, you know, instances where I would say that I didn't have an embedded privilege. However, I would say the one thing I do think about is, since I've been here, so I've been here for 11 years, and I don't do much work in the UK at all. I would say maybe of my private company revenue, maybe 1% has come from the United Kingdom. Now, part of that is because I like to travel, but also part of that is I've never really understood the UK. And I've always been a little bit self-conscious that in entrepreneurship in the UK, there's a fairly strong academic bend to it. I don't know if everyone would agree with that, but I certainly see it. Because I don't have a college degree, I've always felt that was a little bit of a disadvantage. But I do think when you move into new markets, and I think it's probably true for everybody, there is definitely that psychic distance where you don't quite get the social cues, the business culture and things like that. And I felt like there's such a difference that, and I agree with you about the concept of expertise. Obviously, when I'm hired in to do a job, they're hiring me because they think I have expertise. But yeah, I found it almost in the immediacy very difficult to establish a relevance in the market. And because it wasn't that important to market me, I didn't work on it. So I don't know what advice I'd give to a solopreneur. I suppose if I worked on it, it would probably be better. But I think it's really cool because I've never really thought about this. And I do work with a lot of 1, 2, 3-person companies. I've never really thought about it in the terms that you put in here. And I think it's definitely true. And when you consider some of the markets we work in are, you know, they're tough markets. Northern Iraq is a tough market. We're working in Palestine right now. That's a tough market. I think I have to give a lot more thought to the things that you're presenting here. I mean, I've really, really enjoyed it. I started late. But I think you've really put into this some really, really meaningful stuff. So I'm not sure how it applies to me yet. I think it does a little.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you. I appreciate your positive feedback, Tom. And I will say that, you know, when you talked about difficult parts of the world right now, like Northern Iraq or Palestine, I was on one of the sessions, the opening session, I think it was, the GW launch. And there were folks from, there was someone from Iraq who said, hey, who can I connect with to find out about events that are happening here? So there is, you know, if you look at it, one of the ways in which immigrants and refugees, basically foreigners, I'm going to use that umbrella term. If you are in a country that you move to, not your country of birth, and you're trying to establish yourself, a lot of times entrepreneurship is the best way to do that because you're able to do it on your own terms, and you don't have to worry about fitting in. And there's a lot that you can do, and you also bring a completely different perspective to the local market, whatever it may be. And you will see that a lot of, like, for example, a lot of the service-based industries, definitely in the US, are run by immigrants and newcomers to the US, and they're very successful at doing that. Because one is that they're not afraid to fail because they've already undergone a lot to get here. And so the drive to really make things work is very high. And a psychologist friend of mine pointed this out to me. He's also from India, and he's lived here for many, many years. And one of the things he pointed out was that newcomers to the country have more time to focus on work because they don't have any family and other social networks to spend their time with. So as harsh as it sounds, it's really, there's some truth to it, because I've worked in the tech world here, and tech companies that bring in employees from other parts of the world as either on work permit or just a business visa. You'll find that all they do is just work, and the companies are fine with that kind of culture, you know. So that goes into a different realm. But the point I'm trying to make is immigrants and refugees and newcomers to different countries, they bring a whole lot of wealth and different perspective to entrepreneurship and solopreneurship. And they also have to overcome a lot of difficulties, particularly in terms of language, in terms of understanding local rules and regulations around setting up business, which is where, you know, there's something, and I'll share that link here towards the end of the presentation today, the Global Entrepreneurship Index. And it lists out, so what was interesting to me was the US actually is on top of the list. And this is one thing, I do want to spend some time on this one. So if you look at something like that, where it says the US is on top of it leads the Global Entrepreneurship Index, that really, it whitewashes over the different intersectional identity elements that we just talked about. Because on one hand, you say that it's top of the list, but on the other hand, you notice when you dig down into the data, you see that only 2.6% of all the fundraising went to Black and Latinx founders, for instance. So the only when you look into the data with intention can you identify the need to adopt an intersectional lens. And that's the argument I submit to all of you. And
could I just add in here, because I was just about to post on the chat, but we had a really fascinating panel workshop this afternoon on immigrant entrepreneurship. And the whole panel were immigrants to the UK. But I'm sure when they talked about their experiences of starting up their business in the UK, the same issues would apply wherever you are. So, and I'm just putting a plug to say that the recording of that panel will be posting soon as well. But you guys might find that very interesting too. I was fascinated by the whole conversation. I wasn't on the panel, I was just attending, but the content was excellent.
Yes, thank you for sharing that, Elaine. I had a conflict and I couldn't attend it, but yes, I would agree. But then different elements play out differently in different geographies. So for example, in certain parts of Africa, for women, and that's the other thing, you would think that in terms of female entrepreneurs, you would think that they would come from the developed world, but no, it's really Africa, Northern Africa, different regions in Africa that have the most number of female entrepreneurs, 1 in 5. And I want to park this for a second and want to just bring in a little more context. The terms inclusion, diversity, equity, belonging, you know, those acronyms get longer and longer by the day. And I just wanted to throw out a one-line definition. So diversity is all the, you know, the different backgrounds, whatever they may be. And in inclusion, sort of, you know, in terms of metaphors, I'm sure a lot of you would have heard this. Diversity is being at the party, and then inclusion is actually being asked to dance. And you know, belonging and equity. So, and then there is equality. So there are all these terms. Wanted to draw the distinction between inclusion and diversity. Diversity is not something we need to really chase. Diversity already exists. I always say that the inclusion is what brings diversity to life. Inclusion shows your intention to engage with the diversity that exists around you. The other distinction that I wanted to draw was between equality and equity. I can't remember who said this. This is actually a doctor who said this, and I have this written down. I'll share that later. Who said equality is ensuring that everyone has a shoe, and equity is ensuring that it's a shoe that fits. And that's so powerful because a lot of us, and I've been guilty of this, where we look at equity with a lens of fairness, making sure that everybody has the same thing. But maybe not everybody needs the same thing. And that is where equity comes in, which is making sure that the shoe that you're handing out is a shoe that fits. Otherwise, it's of no use and you're really not solving the problem. And the sense of belonging is an outcome of your actions and behaviors that, you know, making sure that they're inclusive. And what does that mean? Taking into account different backgrounds, different orientations, different levels of physical ability, all of that, and just designing for everyone and not just what we think is mainstream. I want to present here in terms of, okay, what is it that us as solopreneurs and entrepreneurs, what can we do to adopt an intersectional lens in our business strategy? Number one is self-awareness, building our own awareness around our identity. So for example, I realized that given my English education and very Eurocentric way of thinking at work, primarily because of the industries that I worked in, be it in India or in the US, I had really given up a lot of things that are part of my identity from a cultural perspective, including the way I dress, including the way I shortened my name once I moved to the US. And once I made the decision to become a solopreneur, I reclaimed a lot of those things because now I didn't have to fit in any mold, and I could create my own personal brand and my own identity around that with a deep understanding of the indigenous wisdom that is part of my culture, and not just, basically I would call it a process of decolonizing my mind. So that's something that I've been on that journey. And really also understanding my own biases when it comes to interacting with folks from other cultures and ethnicities. This aspect of collaboration over competition and give before you get has really worked well for me, and I wanted to bring that out here. So for example, the Global Conference on Intersectionality that I talked about it was a product of collaboration with someone I had only met via LinkedIn, and met Hema in March, and she was one of the speakers at the first global conference that I did in May. And then we really decided, we liked working with each other, and we said, hey, we need to do something together. And this was something, the whole thing around intersectionality was something that was close to both of us. And we said, that's what we'll collaborate on. We come from similar, she's also a solopreneur, very similar backgrounds and very similar lines of work. So for us, it was more about being purpose-driven and collaborating over purpose than being worried about what happens to the leads that might come out of the event that we were doing. So I'm happy to say that, so Hema knows that I'm doing this today. She couldn't be part of this, and which is why I'm here by myself. And, I'm proud to say that we did this whole thing without any written contract, and we were successful. And so bringing that element of trust and showing up as yourself and focusing on collaboration with other solopreneurs and building that network, there's enough for everyone. Yeah. The other thing is around building inclusive business practices. So they're very, very simple things, such as if you're looking at your building your digital assets. So if you're building out, let's say, short videos and things like that, making sure your videos have subtitles or captions, making sure that whenever you post on LinkedIn or other social media and you include pictures and such, that you always fill out what's known as the alt text, so that screen readers can pick that up for folks that have physical disabilities or challenges with vision and or hearing. Making sure that when you list out events, that you include different time zones and call them out and say what geographies this event is accessible to, including different cultural and ethnic perspectives. So these are very simple things that, most of the time do not cost much, because there's a lot of free apps and things like that, if you spend the time that you can find to do all of these things. And so, for example, Microsoft PowerPoint that I'm using right now actually has the ability to use live subtitles. All you have to do is turn that feature on, and as you speak, the subtitles can show up. So thinking about inclusion from various perspectives, that's something that's very easy to do, but it takes a lot of intention and thought and consistency around that. And the last thing I want to call out is, the immense opportunity that we have to use technology for good. That's the beauty of operating at the intersection of people, process, and technology, which is what I consider my thing. Not using technology for the sake of technology, but really looking at what good can come out of it and why are we using that technology. So, for example, using Zoom, there's so many different things that you can do to facilitate a group and make sure that you build an inclusive environment, even if you're not face-to-face. Using different features. And so, for example, LinkedIn, at least on the mobile app, there's a way that you can record the pronunciation of your name. And so to me, something like that is an application of technology for good. So there are many ways in which solopreneurs can adopt an intersectional lens to how they want to do business and they want to work. So I wanted to also share a couple of personal examples. So for example, the platform that you're on today, the UB City, this is a small business, a woman-owned business, a woman-led business from within my neighborhood. And I met them because they hosted a meetup for entrepreneurs, and that's where I met them. And of course, I mean, I like their product, but the main reason, the first reason that I decided to use them was because I wanted to support another business in my community. They're also immigrants, economic immigrants to this country. So there were a lot of those elements that drove me to make this decision of using this platform and continuing to stick with them. The other thing was the events and all of the other activities that I've been able to do under the North Star banner. They all have been through collaboration. So being a solopreneur, as lonely as it can be, and I totally agree with all the comments that have been made so far, I think one of the most rewarding ways to navigate that is to collaborate with other solopreneurs, and you can come up with something even more impactful and really leave a legacy by doing that. So yeah, so that's what I wanted to share with everyone today. My own lived experience with intersectional identities and my current journey as a solopreneur, and the impact that I saw of my intersectional identity on my solopreneurship journey, and what are some things that we as solopreneurs can do to adopt an intersectional lens to how we work and do business, and really make inclusion and equity the focus of our business strategy. And actually, I almost forgot. There's one thing that I did have one more poll. What is your biggest barrier in interacting with those who look, speak, or think differently from you?
Yeah, I put psychic distance, you probably can figure it out.
Yes.
And I mean, I have to say, I've been here for a decade and I still feel it. I leave conversations all the time thinking that I talk too much. Americans have that reputation, not unearned, I would say. And it's really strange. Like socially, it's fine, but business, I've never really gotten a handle on business culture. And I think psychic distance is probably the biggest part of it, because it's my perception of what is happening around me or with the other person across the room, more than maybe what they're thinking. And I guess that is the problem with psychic distance, right? It's your feeling in a room of strangers or people in a different culture. And I don't feel it as much in other cultures. So like we do a lot of work in the Middle East, and I find myself very comfortable in cultures like that. Less so in the UK. That is weird. I haven't really thought about it before today. I think it's Elaine. Elaine makes me feel weird. She's really hard on me and rude, and I'm gonna blame her.
Come on, Tom. I mean, it's very interesting that both Tom and myself have had a lot of years' experience of working in the Middle East, and I lived in the Middle East for 8 years, and it's fascinating here. And I miss, to be honest, the diversity that I experienced when I was in the Middle East. The cultural diversity, everything about it. I mean, I live and work not too far outside of London. I'm in London frequently. And whilst many people say, yeah, that's an international city, I don't get the same satisfaction or experience of diversity in London as I experienced when I was working in the Middle East.
Yeah.
Right, absolutely. I understand that. I've visited and I understand.
Meenakshi, I'm afraid I'm going to have to go. I'm on dinner duty tonight. But thank you so much. I thought this was really, really interesting, and I look forward to getting the slides, and I'm definitely going to incorporate it into our work.
Absolutely, great. Tom. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Brilliant to see you again, too. Thank you so much for doing this.
Likewise. Thank you.
See you later. Bye.
Yeah, bye. I just wanted to close out with an intention. So if you can either put it in the chat window or you can use the same link. The one question I wanted to ask each of you is, what's the one thing you commit to doing towards adopting an intersectional lens in your own business? Just so that you walk away with an intention from the hour that you've spent here. That's all I had to share with you. Thank you very much for making the time.